are back, ladies and gentlemen, at the Snake Bros Institute for Advanced Corporate Studies. There are no degrees here because the learning never stops. And, you know, the being wrong never stops.
Yeah.
Can't give out degrees on how wrong you are. So it's, you know, it's getting into winter, and I've been getting back into the missing 411 mystery. But winter isn't special. Like, this happens to me. Like, it's getting into summer, back into 411. It's spring, 411. Fall, 411. I'm just saying. But it's getting into winter, and I'm getting into the 411 stuff. So I kind of want to, like, I've been trying to, like, arrange this in my mind to explain it, because I go, you know, you guys know that I go through all these discussions online, and I'm a part of, like, all these subreddits about stuff, and I see these questions a lot, and I'm sure that some of you know, some of you have listened to my previous 411 explanations, and you guys have heard this stuff. So bear with us, you know, if we have new listeners or whatever, the people I'm explaining for them. And also for myself, because I like to go through this stuff with you guys, because it sort of helps me get all these things in line in my head. So first of all, I want to talk about the methodology. Like, I'm listening to Politis on one of the interviews that he's done, and it was one of the early ones, and he's talking about the methodology. And I hadn't heard this one before, so I wanted to kind of recount it here. The way that he set about finding these cases, okay, aside from the story that he tells where the two park rangers come to him outside of the national park and tell him that he should look into it, the way they actually set about, like, going about finding these cases was, first they looked for cases where people were not found. Okay, so where, like, before they had a profile, right? They have all these missing persons cases, and they start looking. Let's separate. First, what they did was they separated out all the ones that had explanations, like they drowned, they were suicidal, they got attacked by an animal, they broke their leg and they were stuck. They culled all those out of the samples. Okay. And then he basically he separated into, like, people that were found, or bodies that were found, or people that were discovered, whether alive or dead, and then people that were never found. Then they started going through all the cases where the person was never found, where they were never located, okay? And that's where they started to see pieces of the pattern, the profile appear, okay? Not all of the ones where people were never found were very mysterious. Like, some of them are just, like, you could kind of tell that the person, there was, like, evidence that they didn't know what they were doing, or maybe that they shouldn't have been there, or whatever, but, like... And those still may be mysterious cases, but there's not enough evidence in the files to really call them out. But he found enough in the cases where people were never found. And this is the thing. He explained this really well in this show. I wish I knew which one it was specifically. I think it was when he was talking to Whitley Strieber on Dreamland. But he was like, look, in the SAR world, the search and rescue world, it's weird not to find the person. Those are the rare cases. Like, the most of the time when somebody goes missing, they are found eventually, whether alive or dead. Yeah. Okay. Most of the time they're discovered, because these people have gotten incredibly good at this. They have all these statistics. They have all this data. They have conferences every year where they come together. They have, like, people who are, you know, like, people who look at things scientifically, or who are statistical analysis, people that are medical professionals. They come together and they put together all these they put together, like, a series of guidelines for searching for people that have to do with all of these various fields of expertise, and then all of these other various things of basically collected data about what people do when they go missing, right? So they have these ways. They sit out and they make grids based on how long they've been missing, and they make these circles on a map that get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they have this very, like, specific, and they bring the dogs out, and the dogs are incredibly talented. And, like, they do flyovers in grids, and, like, at the beginning, people walk literally shoulder to shoulder through wilderness, like, not missing a single area, right? Yeah. So to have people not be found is, number one, is a very small percentage of the total cases where people go missing. Most of the time they're discovered, whether alive or dead. So you have this small percentage of cases where people are just never found, and the mystery is never solved. And it was in that group where he started to see the pattern of the profile that he eventually developed.
And that's when he began to pull in other cases where people were found. And he saw similarities
right.
to the ones
so
that
he
were not.
sees all these. That's right. Okay, so you see how this begins to build. Like first, he's look at the ones that never were solved and sees all these similarities across many of those cases, and then he's able to spread out and look at the ones where the bodies were discovered and say, wait. In this case, a lot of those same points happened to this person, and then then you look closer, like, well, where were they found, and what was the condition, and then you start to see other weird things, and so that builds more of the profile. Okay,
and then you can actually like take that the situation where the people were found, and then apply those to the ones
back to the ones where they weren't found, and find more. Exactly, yeah. So this is how he's built the profile. This is why he was able eventually to progress into less like deeply wilderness areas into like rural areas, right? So then you go into rural areas where it's like farmland and, you know, like not cities or whatever, not even suburbs, but just like rural areas where there's houses and shit. It's not a state park or a natural area. There's roads but there could be many square miles of wilderness, but it's owned by somebody or whatever. Yeah. And then he was able to expand from there into almost suburban areas. And then from there, he went into like very specific cases of like the hunters. And then like he, of course, people were sending him the smiley face murders. OK, the smiley face murders are like a very specific set of cases where young college age men, it's mostly males, were found like in bodies of water, usually canals or rivers going through major cities. Okay. And it was always the same story. Like they went out drinking with their friends. Somehow they got kicked out of the bar, or they got left outside, or they decided to go home early or whatever. And they end up not ever coming home. No one knows what happens to them. They're not on any CCTV, and their body is found weeks, months later, floating in this body of water. And then everybody assumes that they were drunk and fell into the canal that night. But then it turns out that they only died 2 weeks ago and they were missing for a month. Right. Yeah. So, and then he said, okay, I gotta take a breath. He said these medical examiners, he said the only reason I started looking at those cases specifically, the quote unquote smiley face murders. And the reason they're called that is because it's a long stretch, but people have like said, well, everywhere this was found, there was a sort of a smiley face graffiti nearby where the person supposedly went into the river. Okay. I don't know if that has anything to do with anything. Neither does anybody else, but they're called the smiley face murders because of that. So basically what that means is like the smiley face murders is like people imply that it's a serial killer. Yeah. And their MO is to do this exact thing because it lets them get away with it because everybody assumes the drunk kid fell in the water. Right. Yeah. So he said the only reason he started looking at them is because some very smart medical examiners began to question the state of the bodies. Number one, a lot of the times it would turn out that they didn't drown. Yeah. Okay. Or it would turn out that they did drown and yet they would find. So this is going to be gross. Okay. Just warning you, if you have any kids listening to this, hopefully you don't. This is gross. So like get the kids away for a second. But if you die on land, one of the first things that happens to you is flies plant larvae, eggs, in your groin area. Okay. It's disgusting. But this is one of the ways that medical examiners can tell the condition of the body, whether you die. Like if you died in water, that doesn't happen. Flies don't lay eggs. Yeah. Right. In your pubes if you're underwater. That just doesn't happen. But if you die on land, that does happen. So they find these bodies in the water and yet they have the larvae there, implying that they died on land, not in water. And yet their lungs are full of water. Right. So there's all these strange things like, it's almost like what the idea that you get eventually is that somebody wants it to look like they drowned, but they didn't really. Yeah. So these medical examiners are looking at that stuff and they're starting to question this. Like, this is weird. How can his lungs be full of water, but he has these signs that he died on land? Right. Yeah. So they started to do more tox tests. Now, like they started to find GHB in the body. Now, GHB is endogenously produced in the human body, but in large amounts or in certain dosages, it's considered a date rape drug. Basically, what it does is it paralyzes you, but you're awake. You're awake and aware of what's happening, but you can't move anything. Ugh. Okay. So the other thing that happens is GHB disappears very quickly from your tissue and your bloodstream. Like even if you're dead, It sort of breaks down. I'm not sure exactly the chemistry. Maybe the watcher knows more than I do. The physics, the mathematics of this. But basically, like, if you don't find it, if you don't test for it very quickly after the person is dead, you're probably not going to find any signs of it. But they had these ways of testing, and they found out that these people had elevated levels of GHB in their blood. Okay. So that's why he started to include those cases specifically, is because
No, I'm just kidding.
The GHB was just in the water. They fell in the water and they couldn't move. Yeah. So anyway, going back to the profile, like his entire like the way the profile unfolded was fascinating to me. Starting with the most mysterious cases where people were never found, and discovering all these connection points between many, not all, but many of those cases, like boulder fields, berry picking, inclement weather, dogs can't track a scent, or dogs seem confused, or dogs seem afraid, or dogs seem to refuse to track, or they track for a while and they quit, right? Or the person goes missing with the dog and the dog returns. Very small children. Like, this is another thing with search and rescue. Like, and this actually, most police, I can't say most because I don't know this, but a lot of police precincts or jurisdictions or sheriff's offices or whatever have stopped having the requirement of 24 hours if a child goes missing below a certain age. I think it's like 10, because kids under 10 don't run away most of the time. The vast majority of them they just won't run, and like, especially if they're 6 and under, they don't run away.
Yeah.
Right. They might run off into the woods to play, but they're not trying to
they might get lost. They're not trying to escape.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of the older cases you see, the kid goes missing, and then like sometimes it takes a while for the parents to be able to get people out there to really look, because there's this whole 24-hour thing. But in other cases that doesn't happen, and like massive search efforts show up almost instantly, and they find nothing.
Yeah. Right.
So there's a couple of cases that I'm going to try to tell these off the top of my head, because I don't have the books that they're in yet. I'm in the process of acquiring every single book. Right now I only own 2 of the books that he's written. But so these cases that I'm going to tell are ones that I was hearing him talking about. One of them really was interesting to me, but it happened in like the 1950s, so it isn't recent, okay? But this is the point. The guy, it was a hunting trip, and the guy he went off for he was supposed to be gone for a couple of hours, right, from his camp, and where he was camped with a bunch of people, and he just didn't come back. And he had been hunting there his entire life. He was like 68 or something like that. So he had been hunting there his entire life, and everyone was like, what's the deal? Like, he knows this land like the back of his hand. Or maybe, I'm sorry, he went to get water. He wasn't even hunting. They were out there to hunt, but he just went to a nearby stream to get water to come back. It was like at most a 20-minute walk if you're going slow, okay? And he just didn't return. So they set up this massive search, and they don't find anything, okay? And I mean, it was an enormous search. Like, they had all these people out there. Even for the 50s, it was a big search. They had hundreds of people out there combing the woods or whatever, and they had the problem with the inclement weather, okay? So like snow and sleet and everything comes in. They don't find him. So I think it was 2 weeks later, a group of hikers in another area were just kind of hiking around, and they see a body out in this river that was it was the river that he went to get water from. Okay. The river, though, is like 18 inches deep. You can't drown in it. It's just not possible. Right. But they reported the body. They didn't go touch it or anything, but they reported the body that was in the water to the authorities, and they came out and got it. And Politis said that the reports were very strange. He was like, so a lot of my readers ask me about the state of the feet, but because the shoes are missing so often. So anyway, this guy, I can't remember his name, but he was found wearing only a shirt and his underwear. His pants were gone. His boots were gone. Coat was gone. Gloves were gone. Hat was gone. Everything was gone. So he was in his shirt and his underwear. They said that his feet were worn to the bone. The bottoms of his feet were worn all the way to the bone. And that he didn't drown, but he died from exhaustion. And his body was found, the place where his body was found in the water was 15 miles from his camp. So again, it's rare that he is able to, like he says this on this show. He's like, it's rare that you're able to find the condition of the feet in the reports. You know, when they say they found the person and their shoes were off, and you're like, well, what was the condition of their feet? Well, this is one where they did tell the condition of the feet, and they said it was worn to the bone. And it's like, so then the question he immediately asks is, could you walk on your feet if they were that badly damaged? How is that even possible?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
like pure terror?
Yeah, people can do some crazy shit, I guess. I don't know.
And like they definitely, it wasn't, you know,
to survive.
Another thing that is, you know, is a big.
But it's like if your feet were worn down to the bone, would the rest of your body
stop allowing you to?
Well, like would there be signs on the rest of your body that you were falling and stumbling? I mean, you should have like lacerations all over you from. Yeah. You know, if you have an injured foot and you're trying to walk.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times you hit something that really hurts bad and you fall.
Yeah, and when they said
you get more injuries,
and they said that he died from exhaustion, which implies running and like fleeing, or you know that he, like 15 miles isn't far enough away to like completely kill yourself if you were just walking. But if you were like tearing through the mountains, running through the forest, you know, up and down boulders and everything, and just scrambling, and maybe he didn't go straight in a straight line. He was trying to run away from something.
Yeah, unless it like.
I assume
was it really cold? Did he get frostbite on his feet and just wear them down because he can't feel them? Or
maybe that's okay. I can't remember what time of year it was, but he, you know, the water wasn't frozen, so it wasn't that cold. So, but it was hunting season, so I would assume that it was in the winter or winterish, right?
Yeah.
Still, yeah. Worn to the bone is very strange, and you know, this is another thing, like. Another part of this mystery that's very strange is the whole feet and shoes deal with British Columbia, right? Have we talked about this before?
Yeah.
Where the feet, and it's predominantly left feet.
I don't remember that. Yeah.
It's predominantly left feet, which is like, okay, so the first thing that like you'll see if you go look this up online is you'll see people saying, oh, well, they were suicides. And the reason, and these are mostly feet that are in running shoes. And running shoes are sort of buoyant. So you would imagine these people are suicidal and they fling themselves off of a bridge into the water and their body starts to decay in the water, but the shoes are wanting to float. So eventually they come loose at the ankles and just float to the surface and they end up on a shoreline somewhere and somebody finds, well, then why are they all left feet? Right. And there's no evidence that anybody was suicidal. They were able to identify the remains in one of the shoes as belonging to this one particular and there have been like many dozens and dozens of them found. They were able to identify one foot as belonging to this person, and it was said that he was kind of despondent. But there was no suicidal, but they like have extrapolated from that one guy and saying, well, these are probably suicides. And, you know, left feet float more than right feet. And I don't know.
So, like, how often do they do this forensic entomology on these cases?
Well, on things like just a foot, they do a lot, as far as I know.
Because, I mean, like that...
But, again, I
remember reading about that, like, years ago. I was like, what is this? I don't remember where. It was some magazine. There was an article about it.
About the feet?
About forensic entomology, where they study they can pinpoint literally the minute of death.
Yeah.
By the state of the bugs.
Yeah.
And
it was lands on you in 6 minutes.
Yeah, well, within like 80 seconds or something.
But if you die in water, it's totally different.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But there should be the same set of circumstances in the water, right?
Yes.
Depending on the ecological system or whatever it is in the water.
Right, so if you're a saltwater or freshwater or river or lake.
There's going to be different animals that are going to do certain things. And like bacteria.
The problem with it is that in a marine environment, that's probably true. But almost like every lake has a very specialized environment, and like, you know, like they all have things that are sort of the similar, but most lakes have some stuff that's...
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, you have to know the environment that they're in. So if they're in the specific body of water, like, what are the circumstances in that water?
Right.
And then you could...
So you have to have a medical specialist who specializes in that lake.
Yeah.
To know. Like, that's why it's
biologists
hard.
Or whatever. And then they have to work together with a
right.
You know, forensic specialist.
And so some of these forensic guys are doing this. They have discovered these strangenesses about these particular cases, and they start digging through the backlog of files, and they start calling other medical professionals and be like, didn't you deal with a body that was found in this circumstance? And the guy's like, yeah. And they're like, can I see the files on that? And they send it to him, and they start talking to each other. And this is what Politis was talking about, that a small group of very like these guys are dedicated to their jobs and they have discovered these problems and they're like, well, what's going on? What's really happening here? And it looks like we're being tricked, right? Like in a lot of these cases, like not the feet, but I'm talking about the smiley face murders in specifics. Like it looks like like somebody is purposefully making it look like something happened that didn't, And the other thing about those particular cases is like, and I've seen these comments online a lot. People are like, well, people get drunk and they fall in the water. I'm like, no, you can only say that if you don't.
People get drunk and they fall in the fire. They don't fall in the water.
Speaking from almost personal experience here, like personal experience, not being the one falling in the fire, but witnessing this thing happening. People get drunk in Texas, people get drunk and fall in the fire.
Yeah.
Maybe
it's a desert out here.
Right. That's right. We don't have any water. So there's fire. That's what we fall in here. Large limestone rocks break and we fall into fires.
That's right. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Derail you there.
No, that was fantastic. That was fantastic derail. It was anyway, so where was I going with all this? I can't remember where I was going.
You were saying now. People, like on the smiley face murders, like there's people online that say people get drunk and they fall in the water.
Right. The problem is that there are lots of college towns that have bodies of water in them or near them in the area where the bars are, and people don't fall in the water there. It's just these specific cities where this happens. So other people have tried to say, well, it must be the condition of the canal or the way that everything is set up and it makes it easy for people to fall in the canal in this place or not. But I've gone and looked at pictures of it, and it's not. Like, you can't even freaking get to the water in some of these places. For this drunk kid to have fallen in the water, he had to have climbed over a whole bunch of crap like Spider-Man, even though he's hammered, and not died doing that stuff, and then got into the water, right? Yeah. He had to be very determined to get into the water, and that's... Okay.
I'm going to go swimming, man.
Yeah, in Minneapolis, right, in the winter.
Polar dip.
They kicked me out of the bar, man. I'm going to take a dip. So, I have a special story that I want to tell, and it's about one of those cases. And...
What, the smiley face murders?
Yeah, one of the smiley face murders. So, like, the interesting thing about the profile of these particular deaths these are all young men. Okay, so they're college kids, so of course they're all going to be young, but they're all males, and all of them are sort of top of the line or top of their game, or they're all like athletes and graduating with all these honors and in physics or medical. They're very smart and they have everything to live for, and they have like a beautiful fiance. Or we've told some of these stories. Mm-hmm. So there's this one guy. And his friends called him Mr. Reliable.
Uh-huh.
So that's why I'm telling this story. Oh, Reliable. They were at an event. I can't remember if it was a baseball game or some sort of sporting event, or maybe it was a bar. It doesn't matter. The point is that he told his friend that he was there with. He was like, look, man, I've been awake a long time. I've got tests to take or whatever. I kind of just want to go. And his friend's like, oh, okay. So, and he was like, don't worry. I'll call my girlfriend. She'll come pick me up. So he goes out into the street and he makes a phone call to his girlfriend. She answers the phone and she's like coming to get him. And like, she hears him say like, wait, I'm not sure where I am. And then she, like, somebody in the background, she hears somebody say, oh, you're at 99 something street. So that's where she goes. And she's actually right around the corner. Like, she's just like, less than a mile away at that point. She's like, okay, I'm almost there. And he's like, okay, good, because my phone's about to die. And then it dies. She comes around the corner and he's nowhere to be seen. Right? Like, basically right after the phone dies, she pulls up to the area where she comes around the corner and pulls up to where he was. He's not there. And she gets out. She parks her car. She walks around for an hour. Can't find any sign of him. Eventually, she gets back in her car. She goes home. She calls his parents, and then she calls the cops. And they say you have to wait 24 hours to report somebody missing. By now, all of his friends, including the guy that was in the bar, her and his parents are all flipping out because he's like Mr. Reliable. He doesn't ever do anything like this. He's very punctual. He's very right. And he wasn't hammered. He went in with his friend for just a small period of time, maybe an hour. He had one beer, and then he went out. Okay. So he wasn't drunk. So by the time the next day comes around, they start up this massive search, and they don't find anything. And the dogs can't find anything, and they can't find anything on CCTV cameras, which were everywhere, all over the place. Okay. Same deal. Eventually they find him somebody else finds his body weeks later in the water. Okay. But in this case, his clothes are all gone. Right. Oh, I'm sorry. The one thing they did found was his cell phone smashed into like hundreds of pieces near the body of water, which is why they started to assume that he went into the water. Okay. But it was like crushed.
Yeah.
And they were only able to identify it by like they gathered up all the pieces and they had some poor nerd in some warehouse like fragment them back together and be able to get the serial number off of it. And then they were able to identify it as being his. Wow. Because it's completely decimated, right? Just shards of glass and plastic and silica. So eventually they find him in the water and they said that he was, they ruled it as an accident, but he had blunt force trauma to the head and shoulder area, and they claimed it was propellers. That a boat, that he had somehow gotten, his body after death had gotten mixed up with a boat and it had beat him about the head with the propeller. Okay. So that's a really strange story, and like it's kind of the way these smiley face murder things go. Like the person has no reason to disappear, and they vanish sometimes very quickly. Right? There was the one I told before about the guy who went into the bar and never came out. Yeah. Right? That story is still strange, and he's never been found, still, to this day. No evidence has ever been found. Then there's the other strange one, and it's in this area. It's in these same areas where this is happening, and you guys can go look this up, but he actually made a phone call to his wife. She was asleep. He made a phone call to her in the middle of the night, and her voicemail picked up, and the voicemail message is horrific. There's like all this crazy yowling and it sounds like insane animal noises, and you can hear him begging something in the background. He's like, please don't, or something like that. And there's all this roaring and it's crazy sounding. Wow. They actually played part of it on the news, which is how I was able to find it, because the actual message has never been released to the public, but this news station got a piece of it, and so like you have to listen to it with this announcer woman talking over the top of it. She's like, this is the message you can hear in the background, like all this crazy, just what is going on? And that was the message. He's never been found. He's never been located. You know, and he was like a doctor or a professor or something like that, an older man. So he was not a smiley face murder in the sense that he fell in the water, but this is one of the northern cities where this stuff happens. Right. So, but the most disturbing thing in the 411 stuff is the small kids. So I'm getting back to that. I jump all over the place when I'm talking about these stories, so I have to apologize for that.
Yeah, it's all good.
The most disturbing thing are the small so if any of you have ever been interested in missing persons cases, you might be familiar with what's called the Charlie Project. That is a website online where this girl has dedicated her entire life to building an enormous website database of every missing persons case in the United States that she can find. Okay, and listing them on and finding all she digs out every bit of information she can find about the case, all the articles, pictures, anything she can find, and she puts them all together in a file on the website, and you can go through. It's called the Charlie Project, named after a kid who went missing. Okay, Charlie Project.
All of them are ones that were unsolved, like nobody was found, no body was found.
Yeah, they're all ones that are still. There's people that are still active, missing.
Right? Okay, yeah. All right.
It's called charlieproject.org. So I frequented this website for a while, and I started to get interested in the missing persons issue. But and the most interesting thing was she, who I consider to be, no matter what anybody else says, I consider her to be an expert in missing persons cases. She has by herself built this enormous reference database. Okay, she read the first Missing 411 book and wrote a big basic commentary on it on the charlieproject.org. You can still go find it. And like, I consider her to be an expert in missing persons cases. And she read this and she was like, I was going through my database and like a lot of these aren't in my database, right? Politis has pulled out, because she doesn't travel. So like he had people going to all these small towns outside of the parks and digging through newspaper archives, right? She doesn't have that. And they're digging through newspaper archives that aren't digitalized yet.
Yeah.
So she starts adding these cases to her database, and she said the most disturbing thing in the books was small children who disappear without an explanation in incredibly rural places where it cannot be. You can't say that they were kidnapped because there's no one there to kidnap them, right? A lot of times these people disappear. There's no roads to get there. They're way out on these trails, and like there's no one else there. And if there was somebody else there, the likelihood that this kidnapper would be able to come in and snatch the kid with no noise and nobody else that's around it's just, she's like, this is incredibly unlikely that it's a kidnapping. So this child, or at least a kidnapping by anything we understand, right?
Yeah.
So she's like, so first of all, that's the most disturbing thing. And then the second part of that disturbing thing is that when they're found, if they are found, they're found in places they could not possibly have gotten to as a child.
Yeah.
So in those, in that sense, children have been found miles and miles into bogs, right? Basically like half frozen, watery marshes that are in like uplands, right? So it's an upland area. It's like high elevation. There's a marshy area in this valley, and the water is the water plus mud is between 4 and 6 feet deep. And like the searchers are having to go through, and it's up to their chests, and they're freezing their asses off. And there's no way that this little 6-year-old went through all that shit and ended up on a rock in the middle of that stuff, dead. It's just not possible.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And of course, they're always found with no clothing or very little clothing. The kids are found almost naked, right? Sometimes with abrasions all up and down their body, but they haven't been molested. No sign of sexual predation, and yet that's the first thing you think. You look at this and you're like, okay, this little 8-year-old girl gets snatched from her parents' campsite. They find her miles and miles away, way up on this mountain ledge, where they have to rappel down to get to her because you can't even climb up to it. They have to land on top of the ridge or climb up to the ridge some other way and then rappel down to her using pitons and ropes and all these people. So she couldn't possibly have gotten there. They find her. She's only wearing her panties. She's dead, but she hasn't been sexually assaulted. So what is doing that? Like what is the like the first thing you think of is some crazy, like deranged, like forest dwelling human has taken the person, but to do what? To drag the child all the way up the mountain and just drop them on this ledge? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And then, of course, one of the other big profile points that he talks about a lot is where bodies are found, where they've been searching multiple times. So the searchers all go out there and they're searching everywhere. And, and he's like, look, I don't think that SAR people are incompetent. They're very good at what they do. They find the vast majority of missing people. So when they're all out there searching and suddenly on day 10 of the search, the body is found on the trail that they all used to get to the search area, that's not something weird is happening there.
Yeah.
Like the body is placed there. It wasn't there. He's like, I don't think that they were hopping over the body every day to go out there to search for that guy. They didn't miss that, Or when this spread out campsite, so they're searching for this dude up and down the Appalachian Trail and they can't find him anywhere, and then months and months go by. And then somebody who's hiking the trail says they next time they get to a station or whatever, they report like a sort of a disturbing looking campsite that they saw just maybe 50 feet off the trail. So the searchers go back up there and they find this dude that they've been looking for, that they looked for like over a year ago. All of his shit spread out all over the place right off the trail. And then like they find fragments of his body kind of off in the woods near that. But what it looks like is somebody took all of his gear and sort of spread it all out looking for something and then just kind of left. So need to take a break. But, and we'll come back into this. And I've actually got one of the books here. I want to read a couple of the cases directly out of the book. So
doesn't make any sense. It's not snakes.
No, it's not snakes. No, it's not snakes. Too cold.
Yeah, it's too cold for snakes. We're back. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, hailing from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of disappearances, where all of the right answers magically disappear without a trace.
All right, so I have the Missing 411, Western United States and Canada book here. And I just want to read. I've got these 2 cases here, and there's probably some other ones in the beginning that I want to tell you guys. So the first one is Christopher Andrews. I think I need to move this mic because I'm going to be looking down. Christopher Andrews, missing. He went missing on 10/03/08, so this is 2008. Iceland Lake, Tuolumne County, Immigrant Wilderness in California. Age of disappearance 42. So Amy and Christopher Andrews were married and lived in the wealthy community of Hillsborough, California. Christopher was employed by the Oracle Corporation, and he had actually left school 1 semester early to take the job. In October of 2008, Christopher took a 5-day break from work and headed to the Immigrant Wilderness area, a region on the northern perimeter of Yosemite National Park. So these 2 cases that I'm going to read, this one and the next one, are in Yosemite, or in the area. He was an experienced and avid hiker. He was safety conscious to the point of carrying a personal safety transponder. So this is the reason I want to read this story. Whenever you listen to David Paulides on the air, he talks about, because people inevitably ask him, like, well, how do we not go missing when we go hiking, and like, I love camping. How do I not do this? And he says that the 2 things like that he rarely ever sees is somebody that went missing who was armed and was carrying a personal safety transponder. Okay. And you can get those things now for like $150. Like if you break
that and a life straw. Yeah. Gotta have a life straw.
Gotta have a life straw. So a safety transponder just talks to satellites and basically sends an emergency. You just click it, sends an emergency signal to a satellite, and it informs authorities that you've gone missing, and then they're able to zero in on the signal. Okay. So he was safety conscious to the point of carrying a personal safety transponder. Christopher was in the wilderness when the transponder was activated on Friday, October 3rd. The transponder sent the signal to emergency services via satellite. Emergency services contacted the Tuolumne County Sheriff's Office and notified them of the location of the signal, Iceland Lake. The signal was received late Friday, and rescuers were not able to get started until Saturday morning because of high winds and a storm that hit the area. So again, you have the inclement weather. And it's like the interesting thing about inclement weather, because a lot of the arguments I see are people like, well, weather happens. You're going to have some cases where people disappear because of inclement weather, or weather happens right after they go missing. But what's interesting about these cases, when you read through the books, is you find out that it isn't that weather happens when they go missing. It happens when people start looking for them. That's what's weird about it. Right? It's almost like, they go missing and there's no reason to go missing. There's no inclement weather. There's no bad snowstorm or no ice, ice rain or anything like that. But as soon as somebody says, this guy hasn't been back in a while, and the searchers get out there, then the storm hits. Now, you could also say that's happenstance, but it's still weird when it also matches up with all these other profile points.
Yeah, my thing about the inclement weather was always like, well, that's a good reason why they didn't find him, because of the weather.
Yeah.
The weather created conditions in which it was impossible to find that person.
Right. Yeah. But you also expect people to find tracks and stuff when there's snow, and a lot of time, and it's like, that's weird too.
Yeah. If it's snowing, you won't find tracks.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Okay. The location where Christopher activated his distress signal has large areas of exposed granite, which is another profile point, like the boulder fields, but also like massive amounts of granite for some reason is a big deal.
Radiation.
Radon. The transponder signal was coming from an area between Relief Lake, which is at 7,200 feet elevation, and Iceland Lake, which is at 9,200 feet elevation. There is a very open and easy hike between these 2 locations, and there would be no need to climb to the top of large granite spires, which are all throughout the area, these huge spires of granite that just stick up out of the ground. Christopher would have known bad weather was moving into the area, and it would have been obvious. The last place you want to be in bad weather is on a peak, as this exposes you to the elements of weather, lightning, wind, rain, etc. There were very good areas near Relief Lake to protect himself from the elements, and there was no need to take to a peak. There are 3 separate and obvious valleys that lead to Relief Lake from Iceland Lake. A few are very protected in our areas where you could sit out the whole storm, right?
Yeah.
On October 5th, a helicopter went into the area. At the same time, the personal beacon shut down. They were unable to locate Christopher at that time. Rescuers initially had difficulty locating Christopher. It wasn't until the weather cleared and a helicopter flew into the area that they were able to find him wedged into the bottom of a crevasse near the bottom of a granite spire. He was dead. Officials believe that he had climbed to the top of the spire, slipped on a wet surface, and had fallen to his death in this crack. So, like, They had found it like this massive, long, thin crack, and he had fallen way down and gotten wedged into it. And like they would never have found him without the personal locator, even though it turned off eventually. But it's like it came on after he fell, because that's where he was. You know, it's very strange. So Politis says, I have personally read hundreds of SAR reports outlining almost identical circumstances. The hiker is always alone, falls to his death in an area where he should not have been. Christopher was a very smart hiker. What could cause him to climb to the top of a granite spire in bad weather? So the question becomes, why did he go up there? Because obviously he was up there at some point to be able to fall down into this crevasse. He got up there somehow.
So the crack was like, basically he wasn't at the base of this thing.
He was jammed in a crack in it.
Way up in there, way up on top. Okay.
So the only way to see him is to fly over the top of the spire and look down into the crack in this thing. And they saw him way down in this crack. You could not see him from outside the spire.
Yeah, so he couldn't have gotten into the crack from outside.
No.
He had to go to the top to fall down into it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so the question is like, why would you climb? No, you know, like if inclement weather is coming in, you don't climb to the very top of the mountain because that's where the weather's going to be the worst, right? Especially when you're talking about cold. Like, and the wind is going to be insane. It's going to be trying to blow you off the cliff. So why did he go up there?
Maybe he thought his transponder wouldn't.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like maybe he was already in trouble and he thought his transponder would
work better up there.
Yeah, but that seems ridiculous.
Yeah, that is a good point though. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, you can do stupid things when you're, you know, you can do stupid stuff when you're lost.
Yeah, or he was climbing to get away from something.
Right. I think that's the implication, is what drove the guy to the top of this thing in this horrible weather and then he falls into the cliff. Like, it's not necessarily saying that something pushed him in there.
And you make it all the way to the top and then you fall in a crack that's on the top.
That's right. That's weird. Okay. This next case is Stacy Ann Arras. Now, if you go to most of the stuff where he talks about this case a lot, but I prefer his written version of it because when he tells the story, he skips some of his own details, and I just want this case is this is also the one that has the conspiracy stuff in it because of the way the parks treated this case. Okay, Stacy Ann Arras went missing 07/17/81, 3 miles southeast of Tenaya Lake, Yosemite National Park, California. Age of disappearance 14. So he says, if there's one story in this section that has caused me to stop and take notice of the dangers in Yosemite, it is the disappearance of Stacy. She was 14 years old when she and her dad joined a group of 10 people and their guide for a trip through High Sierra camps on horseback. The group had stayed together, stopped for lunch at Upper Cathedral Lake, and then headed for their first night stop at Sunrise High Sierra Camp, approximately 3 miles southeast of Tenaya Lake and a mile and a half from Sunrise Lake. The trip parallels Highway 120, approximately 1 mile southeast of it. Stacy had some aches and pains from riding all day and quickly went to the old cabin she shared with her dad. She took a shower and then she wanted to take a short hike to stretch her legs. She started to leave the cabin in sandals when her dad stated that she had better put on hiking boots if she was going to walk on a trail, so she did. At an elevation of 9,200 feet, it would be a slow hike with a vast amount of exposed granite. The lack of trees makes this a spectacular area for sightseeing. Gerald Stewart, who is 70 years old, was also on the ride, and he volunteered to join Stacy on her hike. So Stacy and Gerald started the short 1.5-mile hike to Sunrise Lakes. The hike is across giant slabs of granite with small clusters of large trees that surround many of the hundreds of small lakes in the area. After only a few minutes, Gerald got tired and explained to Stacy that he was going to sit and rest. It was at this time that the trail guide for Gerald and Stacy's trip, Chris Grimes, happened to look 50 yards up the hill from his position in the corral and caught the last glimpse anyone on Earth would see of Stacy. So he basically was able to look from their camp up where they were and was able to see the old man sitting down and her standing there next to him. Stacy stood on a large boulder and looked into the distance and walked into the sunset. Okay, so now he says, on page 467 of Butch Farabee's book, Off the Wall, he states that the 9-day search for Stacy included 8,004 man-hours, 57 hours of helicopter time, 4 separate agencies, and not one clue about what happened to her. The search cost the National Park Service $99,845 in 1981.
Dang.
The potential value of NPS tracking missing persons cases may become evident with this disappearance of Stacy. Maybe the NPS does not want this publicized, or maybe they don't realize the following relationships exist between Stacy's disappearance and the disappearance of others in this same area. I requested the NPS case file on the Stacy Arras disappearance. The request was identical to many others I have made to the MPS system for people who have disappeared and were never found. One of the many cases I requested and received was the disappearance and subsequent investigation of a missing employee and ranger. Up until the point I requested Stacy's case file, I had never been denied my request on any missing persons case. Prior to the formal denial by NPS in supplying me with the Arras case file, Special Agent U, it's spelled Y-U, for the Park Service from Yosemite called and asked me a series of questions. He wanted to know why I was requesting the case. This is a violation of the Freedom of Information Act. Any citizen can ask for any federal file, and the government cannot ask you why you're seeking it. This cannot be grounds for refusing to comply. The agent stated that I was not going to get the case file ever. I advised him that I had several case files on missing people in the NPS, and they were all still active and open. He stated that he didn't believe me. A rather rude comment. I advised him to call the local FOIA administrator in Denver, Karis Wilson, and confirm what I was stating. The agent did clearly state that there were no suspects in the Arras disappearance. The case is still classified as a missing person. There are no leads, and there is no apparent sign that the classification will change in the near future. So, I confirmed that this is just a missing persons case. When I told him she wasn't listed in the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, he stated, again, that he didn't believe me. I have never had such a negative conversation with anyone in the NPS. He denied access to the case file. His arguments why I could not have the file included that there was a possibility that the case may develop a criminal lead. Excuse me, the case was 30 years old. By his own admission, they had no leads. The closest person to Stacy, Gerald Stewart, at the time she disappeared, closest physically, basically, would be over 100 years old today. Why would he make such a statement when I had already received many cases from the NPS that were open and active? Fact, Stacy Arras was not listed in any database as a missing person. Fact, the NPS has denied me all access to the case file. I'm not a great believer in conspiracy theories, but why has this case been withheld from the public? What is in Stacy's case file that the NPS does not want released to the public? It would appear that the NPS has kept Stacy's case out of public view for 30 years, including not putting her on any of the national databases for missing children. Why? In the fall of 2001, I appealed the Stacy Arras decision by Special Agent U to another branch of the NPS, and I was again denied access.
That is weird right there.
So the other thing that he points out is the FBI's involvement in some of these cases. Now, if you go to the FBI's website, they'll explain to you what they investigate, right? And in most cases, the FBI does not like sort of bump the state's jurisdiction out of the way unless it's interstate, right? So if like somebody kidnaps someone and they stay within the state lines, the state may request FBI assistance in the case, but the FBI does not have jurisdiction. But if the person kidnaps somebody and then crosses state lines, the FBI takes precedence. Okay? That's how that works. But they explain on the FBI's website all the stuff that they investigate. Like, here are the cases that we do specifically. And in that list is strange disappearances of children. Okay? And I think that's a good thing for the FBI to be involved in because, like, you want, you know, as a nation, we want to protect our kids, right? And so we have the most powerful, and I mean powerful in the sense of manpower, not government power, but manpower and like brain power, the FBI resources, and they have the best Politis makes a point of this. The FBI has the best profilers on the planet, and they have the best profiling systems on the planet. So he's like, we have a profile for these cases, but the FBI, they really know what they do. They have guys that this is what they dedicate their lives to is building profiles. They're, because they catch serial killers. Yeah. Like the FBI is in some ways it's designed to catch like non-standard criminals like serial killers, right? Serial killers is like not a new phenomenon in terms of the human race, but it is a new phenomenon in terms of criminal investigation because they're so good at what they do that it has only been very recently when we have all this communication where we've been able to figure out that this stuff is happening and then they're able to start catching these guys, right?
Yeah.
So the FBI is designed to catch non-standard, or I should say, they're designed to investigate non-standard criminal activity.
Yeah. And
to like take all these disparate things and put them together in these profiles. And they have these crazy nerds down in these basements putting all these facts together and like drawing, singing strings across maps and shit. Right. Okay. That's what they're good at. Okay. And what he's pointed out, and this is fascinating when I was listening to this, I was listening to a more recent interview with him. Politis, and he was saying that what they've noticed over the course of the years where they've been doing this 411 stuff is the FBI has been showing up earlier and earlier to the weird cases. Okay, like they are still, and they always say we're not taking the case, we're just monitoring. And he says what they mean by monitoring is they're sending their guys there, they're catching all this data, and they're sending it back to the profilers at headquarters, and those guys are putting it together. So what he's saying is they're showing up earlier and earlier. They know something's happening, and they're it's like they're
paying attention.
They're paying attention, and they know something's happening, but they haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do you think this is connected to why the Park Service wouldn't give them the information on this case?
I don't know.
Because like we were talking about this weird shutdown of the observatory, and the reason why they wouldn't tell anybody was because there was a possible connection to criminal activity.
Yeah.
Right.
That could be it. There may be something in
the But it's weird that it's 30 years old.
Yeah.
And there's still, like, what criminal activity, I guess if it's a ring or something, right, of multiple people that are doing this criminal activity, then it would make sense. But it's like...
Yeah. So what does the FBI think it is? That's what I want to know. Like, they have to have, they haven't figured it out yet, but they must have ideas. Okay. Here's the other thing. Like, the last bit of information on the Stacey Ross case, the only thing they like, again, 8,000 man hours, 9-day search, cost them almost $100,000 in 1980. That would be $1 million now or whatever, right? The only thing they found was her lens cap to her camera, and it was just inside the little copse of trees that she walked into the last time anybody saw her. A little lens cap laying on the ground.
Yeah,
that was all they found. Yeah.
Snatched right there.
Right.
Yeah.
Ugh.
That's freaky.
So, two things he lists here. Let's see if I can... Yeah.
So, wait, this guy that
Yeah, Special Agent U.
that was so nasty to him on the phone. It's like...
You make a good point. I just want to say this about the FBI. Maybe this is why they wouldn't give him the case. The special agents for the National Park Service are trained by the FBI. So maybe you're right. Maybe there's some kind of connection there. Like, they go to the same investigative training courses that they send their FBI agents to, in other words, is what I'm saying. Like, so maybe...
Why would they do that with these people? Like this person, or special agent?
Because
what is that person's job?
The special agents are the NPS interior cops. Like, there are crimes and criminal activities in the parks, and they have these guys.
They have these special agents that are trained by the FBI
to like catch,
because they've known about these crazy things for a long time.
Probably.
So they have to get the best freaking guys in there. I mean, it just seems odd.
Yeah,
that in a park. I mean, I guess I don't know. The criminal activity I think of inside of a park is stealing artifacts and getting drunk, right? Yeah. Like doing drugs and partying.
Right.
But
so there are, like, one of the criminal activities at poaching, okay? Now, you don't need a freaking special agent trained by the FBI to catch poaching. But they have found enormous, drug crops in national parks. People...
Yeah,
not tons of them, but they have found people who are trying to do drug manufacturing or crop growing way out in park wildernesses where it's almost know. And that I would say that's less now than it was back before we had all this satellite imagery, because now I guess if you see a freaking marijuana field.
I guess it kind of makes sense if you were like this crazy abductor type person, murderer type person from the city.
Yeah.
And you're wanting privacy or a way to get away from...
So you go out into the park and wait.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The problem is...
So that what I'm saying is that makes sense in terms of getting an FBI agent or a special agent in these parks to
they have
take care of monitoring that type of...
Yes, and there have been... Activity. Some serial killers have been identified as working in national parks, and they've been busted. Like, we don't... generally when they identify a serial killer, they get busted, right? Like, as soon as you figure out, once you've figured out that there's a serial killer there, you're most of the 75% of the way to catching them. Not always, but so they have found serial killers that operate inside the parks, but they usually work in the cabin areas. They're not in the incredibly remote, like the people riding horses out in the middle of nowhere, because you don't know when people are going to go there. People show up to a national park, like the Watcher and I went to Big Bend. We went out into the backcountry No one, including us, knew where we were going to be, except the vicinity of that canyon. But we didn't tell the parks that before we got there. They don't have to have our plans. We show up and we tried to get the camp spot. And in other words,
right. And it's so remote that like you would notice if you were being followed because it's just like, right. There's only one access road.
Right. Every other car we saw, we were like, look at that guy. Yeah. Because you don't see a car all day, right? You're like, what's he doing out there? Yeah. And yes, you would notice you're being followed. And then it's hard to like set yourself up. Like, you know, like in a city, you can sort of hide behind like a trash can and like wait, you know, for some little kid to come walking by. Well, you can't do that in the middle of nowhere. Like you can hide there for months and no one ever comes by.
Yeah.
So that the likelihood of somebody being in the right place at the right time to snatch somebody from a little kid from the jaws of their parents, basically, is what happens. You know, like the parents turn away for a couple of minutes, they turn back, the kid's gone, and it's never found.
Right. Like if you were following this group of 10 people that were riding horses, and just say you were out in the woods and here come the horses, and you're like, oh, okay, so I'm going to sneak around on the side and just follow them for a while.
Right.
Hoping that one of them will wander off by themselves. Well, that one person wanders off by themselves.
And you're in the wrong place.
And you're on the other side of the group. And you're like, dang it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just... So then they just, like, somebody happens to notice you, like, dashing across the field.
Running across the granite because there's no trees.
Yeah, like, this is... Okay. It doesn't make sense.
Right. And then there's... I don't have a specific case example here, but there are cases where children, like, so if they're camped in a valley, in a bowl.
Yeah.
Right. So they get into the bowl. There's a pass. They come through the mountains, and then they're in a bowl where everywhere from your camp is up. Okay. And the coverage there is like it's rocks and shit, but it's not, you know, there's no trees. Anywhere you are away from the camp, you can turn around and see the camp.
Yeah.
Right.
People get lost anyway or go missing.
And they find them thousands of feet up, dead, you know, and it's a little kid. And you're like, well, what? He could see the camp from anywhere he was on this hillside. Now, maybe they couldn't see him because there's boulders and trees or little bushes. But anywhere he was, he could turn and find the camp. So what happened? Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. Okay. There's a story at the beginning of this book. I'm going to see if I can find it. That it starts out with this guy who is a Bart Schleyer. So he's also told this story on some of the shows. But again, all the points that he has in the book is just, you know, when you listen to him tell the story on the shows that he goes on, it's interesting and it sort of gets you into it. But the details in the book are what it's really about.
I just want to say about the last story, though. Oh. I think it was you.
In 1981, I was 3.
No, you. You know.
Oh, it was you. Special agent.
Yeah.
Oh no, I snatched her when I was 3 years old. I was out there next to, what was it called? Iceland Lake.
No, you. I mean the
special agent you.
Yeah, like that guy.
I think it was you.
He was mean on the phone. It was him.
Yeah. You're never gonna get this file. Hello, serial killer.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what a serial killer would say. Right. Okay. Bart Schleyer. Missing 09/14/2004. Reed Lakes, Yukon Territory, Canada. Age of disappearance 49. If there was ever an outdoorsman who would be considered a man's man, it was Bart Schleyer. Bart was born in Cheyenne, Wyoming in 1954. Due to the location of his birth and the fact that his father, a physician named Otis, was an avid hunter, Bart's life was destined to be lived outdoors. His father took him around the world on hunting adventures, and this had the boy hooked on the hunt, but not necessarily the kill. Bart graduated in 1979 from Montana State University with a master's degree in wildlife biology. He wrote his thesis on bear activity in the Yellowstone National Park and attempted to understand how the bear reacted when confronted by humans. Bart later worked for the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study at MSU and learned live bear trapping skills. Later in life, he became the world master of luring bears into traps. Many professionals stated that Bart knew more about bear behavior, tracking, and luring than anyone in the world. Bart worked for a variety of groups after he graduated from college. At one point, he was employed by the Montana Fish and Game Department, where he would set up bear trap lines in some of the toughest terrain in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Once the bears were trapped, Bart would install collars and follow the bears throughout the summer to study their behavior.
Wow.
One of the many stories about Bart's athletic prowess tells of days he spent hiking the mountains, tracking and walking for 12 hours where there were no trails. So basically, it's bushwhacking is what they call it, right? Bushwhacking for 12 hours that's incredibly tiring.
Yeah.
Then he would head back to his cabin. Once he was home, he would start up an exercise regime of push-ups, squats using logs he had crafted for the task, and a variety of other exercises that would cripple the average person. And he was doing these exercises after a full 12-hour day in the mountains. So this dude is...
He's hardcore.
This guy's hardcore.
Yeah.
He moved to Alaska for a short period and studied taxidermy while enjoying the Alaskan outdoors. For Bart's next adventure, he was recruited by a friend to travel to Russia, to the Far East, to study and trap Siberian tigers.
Oh, man.
Bart was again the optimum expert for trapping, collaring, and studying the tigers. It was also in Russia that he developed a relationship with a beautiful Russian woman, Titania. That's right, Titania. Bart and Titania had a son, Artyom. This was the first time he had dedicated time to a relationship and family. In 2002, so he goes and traps Siberian tigers in Far East in Russia. And it survives that. He's fine, What's a big deal? Tigers, Russia, not a problem. Meet a hot chick, have a kid. Okay.
No big deal.
No big deal.
Do more push-ups.
Squat with this log. 2002, Bart moved to the Yukon Territory and called Whitehorse home, so the town of Whitehorse. He developed a keen interest in the Yukon wildlife and was specifically interested in bow hunting sheep and moose. As a hunter, Bart had conquered almost every continent and most big game with his bow. He felt it offered a bigger challenge than hunting with a rifle. It should be clear to all readers that bow hunting is a skill that can take years to perfect. And yes, I am really good with a rifle. I have not been able to hit anything with a bow yet. Or with a crossbow, which should be even easier. So you have to be a lot closer. You must be stealthy, patient, and committed to be a successful bow hunter. Bow hunting is much more dangerous than using a firearm because you must get very close to your game. You will read about bow hunters in this book that disappeared and were never found. On September 14th in 2002, Bart arranged for a float plane to fly him to Reed Lakes. The lakes sit approximately 110 miles east of the Alaska border, 5 miles west of the Klondike Highway, and 10 miles south of McQuestion, Yukon. There are 4 major lakes in the Reed Lake chain, with the largest being about a 1.25 mile long and the same distance wide. The lakes are isolated from the highway by a river, and travelers cannot get to the lakes unless they fly in. Bart's plane successfully landed at the largest of the lakes and dropped him and his gear on the street. So he basically flies into this incredibly remote area. The plane has to land on the water. He jumps out and is like, "I'll see you in a week." Right? That's hardcore. Yeah. And it's in September. In the Yukon.
Man. This guy's nuts.
Okay. Bart not only took a tent and supplies, but also an inflatable raft to be able to meander around the lake. So Paulides says, I have spent many weeks in the Yukon and developed a few contacts. Warren Lefave is the owner of Inconnu Lodge in the eastern side of the province. When I asked Warren for a provincial wildlife contact to discuss the region around Reed Lakes, he sent me to Rick Fernal. Rick spent 25 years as a wildlife biologist for the Yukon Territory before retiring in 2008. I asked Rick about the Reed Lakes area because I wanted to understand what type of wildlife and habitat it offers. Rick immediately stated that he knew about the Bart Schleyer incident and could never understand why he went to the Reed Lakes. So the guy's like, "You're talking about Bart Schleyer, right?"
Yeah.
That guy was crazy to go there. And I asked him, well, what was he doing there? And the guy was like, "Dave?" Right?
Yeah.
There's no reason for him to be there, Dave. So Rick said the fishing wasn't good at the lakes and there wasn't much wildlife in the area. Rick made it clear that there were many other locations with better fishing and outstanding wildlife opportunities that put the Reed Lakes to shame. So it's really... when I've read this story many times, and I started to think that section has started to make me wonder, what was Bart really looking for? Maybe he, again, was on the trail of something strange. He had conquered almost every animal.
He was looking for pyramids.
You heard it here first, folks. Bart had scheduled his float plane to pick him up at Reed Lakes on September 28th. So he got there the 14th. He scheduled it to pick him up, what was that, 14 days later?
14 days later,
Yeah.
2 weeks.
The pilot arrived at the lake, pulled up to Bart's camp, and was confused by what he found. Bart's tent was found knocked down, but the pilot was not sure by what. Near the tent, he found Bart's backpack with bear spray, along with his VHF radio and a knife. The pilot yelled for Bart, but did not get a response. He imagined that if Bart had left, he would have taken his backpack and his supplies, which were still in the area. The pilot left the area and contacted RCMP, who later contacted friends of Bart. The RCMP, which is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, right?
Good.
RCMP, it's kind of like our state troopers, but on horses.
Okay.
Like old school.
Yeah.
Royal Canadian
gotta
Mounted
be.
Police. Yeah. Mounties. Initially, he had a very limited role in the search for Bart. After he was reported missing, the RCMP did a flyby over Reed Lakes, and that was it. But Bart's friends arrived at the area and immediately went across the lake from his tent. Here, they found his inflatable boat. So the pilot landed, and the boat wasn't there, but all of his gear was there, and his tent. And he was like, why did the boat's gone?
Yeah.
The stuff's here. So they found the boat 60 feet inland from the boat. So on the other side of the lake, and then 60 feet away from the shore where the boat was found, they found a bag full of gear. Leaning next to the bag on an adjacent tree was Bart's bow and arrows. The bag of supplies had not been touched, and it was obvious to his friends that he had been sitting on it. They said it appeared as though Bart had been calling moose from that location. So he gets off the boat, he kind of hikes about 60 meters, sets his bag down, sits on the bag, gets his bow and arrow out, gets his moose collar out. Okay. They said it appeared as though he had been calling moose from the location, so they continued to scour the area. A short distance away, they found a camouflage face mask with a small amount of blood on it. They then decided to call the RCMP back to the scene. On October 3rd, 2004, the Yukon RCMP and the conservation officers went to Reed Lakes en masse and set a grid search pattern in an attempt to find Bart Schleier. 60 yards from the bow, searchers found a skull and a few teeth. They also found a pair of camouflage pants, a camera, and a few small bones. The teeth were later positively identified as Bart's. Most investigators would stop the investigation at this point and claimed a grizzly killed the wildlife biologist, but there were too many strange circumstances to claim a grizzly had killed the man who lured grizzly bears for a living. For starters, there was significant bear and wolf scat at the scene. Many samples of scat were recovered and sent to a lab for testing. One issue that completely baffled investigators, there was no clothing found in any of the bear scat. When bears eat people, they eat everything. Clothing, jewelry, and anything you are wearing goes in and eventually comes out. Okay. It was also odd that Bart's pants were lying on the ground near the scene, almost as though he had removed them. Okay, this is another big deal. Like when they find the clothes that have been discarded, the buckle, the belt is undone, and the pants are unzipped and unbuttoned. It isn't like they got ripped off, right? No bear unbuckles and unzips your pants. Like, yeah. And sometimes when they find the kids, the clothes, if kids are wearing article of clothes, a lot of times they're inside out. Like they'll find the kid and he's missing his pants and his shoes and stuff, but his shirt's on, but it's inside out.
Huh.
Like something put it back on before it dropped him, and it just put it on wrong. Okay. Most of the clothing, okay, so it was also odd that Bart's pants were lying on the ground, almost as though he removed them or they had somehow come off. Most of the clothing that Bart would have been wearing was never found, even after a wide and comprehensive search of the area. Conservation officers at the scene knew that bears usually cache their kills, burying them for later, right? So they'll kill you and then they bury you for later. A thorough search of the Reed Lakes area didn't produce any evidence of a cache or any bloody ground from a body being dragged or wounded. The other troubling issue here is that there was no sign of a struggle anywhere in the Reed Lakes camp where Bart was staying or near his bow. No moss, no tundra, or branches were disturbed. It was a very calm sight. Several investigators made statements. So, like, if he'd have been sitting there and a bear came and grabbed him, there would have been a huge area of devastation because they would have fought. You know, the guy that can, like, bench press logs and shit, like, would have fought the bear. And, like, the bear probably would have killed him fast if he would have gotten a drop on him. But there would have been blood everywhere and signs. He was just gone.
And then his clothes would have been all eaten.
Yeah, exactly. Several investigators made statements that his death is a mystery, and the idea that a bear killed him does not make any sense. People who worked with Bart all claimed that he would have gone down with a struggle. His friends said Bart was in outstanding shape and would have fought for his life. They do not believe a bear could have attacked Bart by surprise. So, one of the last items that investigators found 60 yards from the bow was Bart's cap and a baklava he was wearing. There was no damage to the cap or the baklava, no blood, nothing to indicate something dreadful had happened. So they find some clothes, blood, and he's, and a skull, pieces of fragments. And remember that this is not...
Yeah, like his whole spine, rib cage.
Right, and it's like he's reduced to bones within a month?
Yeah, that's weird. Because he went there in September.
Yeah, like September 14.
Like
it's in October. And like his skull and some teeth, and that's it.
That's really strange, yeah.
So we went over, folks, but it was worth it. But we need to go ahead and quit. So you guys remember... You can always go to the website and comment there. Don't forget our Twitter feed, which is brand new. We're totally Twitter noobs. But
Snickbrit. SNKBRS.
Snickbros. Snake Bros, no vowels. Get on the Twitter feed. And don't forget to share the show with everybody. That would help us a lot. And And I just want to thank you guys very much. Good night, Adamu. Don't disappear.